I mention this in passing. There's a whole wikis of Christianized sites, and Christianization of saints and feasts. But I suppose I should mention one saint. Saint Catherine of the Wheel. Saint Catherine of the Wheel is Hypatia. Picture by Bernardino Luini. Portrait of Catherine of Alexandria. Hypatia was the last mathematician of the Library of Alexandria. The Christians scraped her skin off by eggshells, and then torn apart, her remains were burned. The story of Saint Catherine of the Wheel is: Catherine was the daughter of Constus, the governor of Alexandria. From a young age she devoted herself to study. A vision of the Virgin Mary and the child Jesus persuaded her to become a Christian. When the persecutions began under Maxentius, she went to the emperor and rebuked him for his cruelty. The emperor summoned 50 of the best pagan philosophers and orators to dispute with her, hoping that they would refute her pro-Christian arguments, but Catherine won the debate. Several of her adversaries, conquered by her eloquence, declared themselves Christians and were at once put to death. Catherine was then scourged and imprisoned. She was scourged so cruelly and for so long that her whole body was covered with wounds, from which the blood flowed in streams. Maxentius ordered her to be imprisoned without food, so she would starve to death. During the confinement, angels tended her wounds with salve. Catherine was fed daily by a dove from heaven, and Christ also visited her, encouraging her to fight bravely, and promised her the crown of everlasting glory. During her imprisonment more than 200 people came to see her, including Maxentius' wife, Valeria Maximilla, all converted to Christianity and were subsequently martyred. 12 days later, when the dungeon was opened, a bright light and fragrant perfume filled it, and Catherine came forth even more radiant and beautiful. Upon the failure of Maxentius to make Catherine yield by way of torture, he tried to win the beautiful and wise princess over by proposing marriage. Catherine refused, declaring that her spouse was Jesus Christ, to whom she had consecrated her virginity. The furious emperor condemned Catherine to death on a spiked breaking wheel, but, at her touch, it shattered. Maxentius ordered her to be beheaded. Catherine herself ordered the execution to commence. From the Catherine of Alexandria wiki, this reminds me of what they said in the Dark Ages when burning a person alive were saving their souls. Here's a picture of the insides of the Hagia Sophia. Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official state religion. There was like one Roman emperor that tried to reopen the libraries and allow paganism, but after that, every Roman emperor was Christian emperor. Emperor Constantine split the empire into Western Rome and Eastern Byzantium. The Hagia Sophia is the crown jewel of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines would send the Christianized Germans to raid and sack Rome. The Goths, like most Germanic peoples, with the exception of the Franks and the Lombards, had been converted to Arian Christianity. The Christians had been converting the Germans since 200 AD before the Byzantine Empire. Emperor Theodosius I, ruled 384–395, adopted a different policy, granting the Goths lands and according them the legal status of allies, or foederati, who fought within the ranks of the Roman armies as autonomous units under their own leaders. Furthermore, the East made good use of its resources in gold, in native manpower, and in diplomacy while quickly learning how best to play off one enemy against another. In the reign of Theodosius II, 408–450, the Huns under their chieftain Attila received subsidies of gold that both kept them in a state of uneasy peace with the Eastern Empire and may have proved profitable to those merchants of Constantinople who traded with the barbarians. When Marcian, ruled 450–457, refused to continue the subsidies, Attila was diverted from revenge by the prospect of conquests in the west. Both Marcian and his successor, Leo I, ruled 457–474, had ruled under the tutelage of Flavius Ardaburius Aspar, but Leo resolved to challenge Aspar's preeminence and the influence of the Goths elsewhere in the empire by favoring the warlike Isaurians and their chieftain, Tarasicotissa, whom he married to the imperial princess, Ariadne. The Isaurian followers of Tarasicotissa, who was to survive a stormy reign as the Emperor Zeno, 474–491, were rough mountain folk from southern Anatolia and culturally probably even more barbarous than the Goths or the other Germans. Yet, in that they were the subjects of the Roman emperor in the east, they were undoubtedly Romans and proved an effective instrument to counter the Gothic challenge at Constantinople. In the prefecture of Illyricum, Zeno ended the menace of Theodoric the Amal by persuading him, 488, to venture with his Ostrogoths into Italy. In the end, Theodoric the Great conquered Rome, and built his resting place, mausoleum of Theodoric. After the Germanic tribes sacked Rome, they sought to conquer all of Rome. This meant crossing from southern Spain into North Africa to conquer Carthage. How did they even know Carthage was down there? Unless someone told them there's more to conquer? Down in Carthage, two men came up with two different solutions on how to survive the fall of the Roman Empire, St. Augustine and Martianus Capella. St. Augustine wrote The City of God. There's the City of God, and there was Rome. Rome was conquered because it believed in other gods. Augustine said this world was not worth learning. His motto was Plato's and the Christians, as noted above, believe and you will understand. So the Christians went to obscure monasteries to hide from the German barbarians and the world at large. Martianus Capella's solution was to make a summary of Roman law and learning, the 7 liberal arts. As the Western Roman Empire fell, everything became local and ignorance became the rule. There was no money. People paid for food and huts by servitude. Most people never ventured more than a mile. They lost track of time. They understood time and money, like how I explained number at the beginning of my Gospel of Truth. The example of a theater. They might not know how many seats are in a given Greek theater, but, if they see that all seats are taken, then they can say there's a theater of people. Same thing with money and time at this time. They traded servitude for food and living quarters. And time, they'd say, harvest time, or as the woodcock fly. Important events were marked by dramatic events, like a particularly cold winter. People were scared of long journeys because they didn't know where things were, they were afraid of getting lost. People got treated of disease by astrology. They'd get their prescriptions by their humor, the astrological sign of their behavior. People couldn't read or write. But they learned things as songs and poems. People would get their news from traveling monks from the monasteries, who could read and write. They also got their news from the traveling troubadours. Some of the northern Europeans heard of a mysterious civilization in southern Spain, Andalusia.